Can you believe it? About the halfway mark of the college football season, and who better to hit the halfway mark with than our friend Tim Brando, Fox Sports. Done a bunch of Big 12. He's joining us. I'm Pete Mundo on Heartland College Sports. If you're checking us out on the radio show, we always appreciate that. YouTube, you know what to do. Hit that like button, subscribe, and same thing on the podcast. Well, Tim, it's cliche. The season's flying by, though. And when you look at this college football season, it feels like chaos, especially in the Big 12, is the name of the game thus far. What surprised you the most?
Oh, gosh, nothing. I mean, this has gone exactly the way I thought it would go. Now, what has been surprising is the fact that both Utah and Kansas State, the two favorites coming in, have had some hiccups. But I think Kansas State has settled their circumstances and are still in a very good position, to win the league. Utah rising again, and now losing their offensive coordinator. Ludwig is a big loss. It's been tough sledding for Whittingham this year before he probably hands the reins over to Morgan Scalley. But everybody else, Pete, is as good as I thought they would be, and I don't see this league not coming down to the very final weekend. I think the potential for Farmageddon to be just an absolute magnificent. We had that game in the snow last year.
Mm-hmm.
In Manhattan. The game this year will be in Ames, and that game could be for everything. I mean, for absolutely in terms of trying to determine who the two teams might be, who's in, who's not for the championship game, and then the potential of if Iowa State and BYU can each stay pretty clean until the very, very end, and that's a big ask, but if they can. The pressure that the two of them are going to put on the committee to look at more than one team, the automatic qualifier from the Big 12 getting in, is going to be immense. And we could say the same thing, by the way, about the ACC. If Clemson can continue rolling and Miami continues to roll. Again, tough asks, both of them. But, those fans in the Big 10 and SEC that believe that it's their God-given right to get at least 4, maybe 5 teams in the college football playoff, that could really be in peril if the other two power conferences have more than one team that's undefeated or has one loss going into the championship weekend.
Well, you mentioned that, Tim. The SEC, the Big Ten in particular, I've seen projections that have 2 solid Big 12 teams in there, same with the ACC. But now you get the conversation. Just last week, the SEC and Big Ten were meeting, I'll call it colluding in Nashville, to try to figure out a way to basically stack this deck in their favor. So how is that as a backdrop compared to what actually is playing out on the field this season?
I think more of that, to be honest with you. I know the meetings have raised the ire of a lot of people out not in the Big Ten and SEC. I think that's more about where we're going forward with the new deal in 2 years. I think that's more of a let's get together and project on that. I think also the major issue about those meetings, Pete, are about scheduling games between the two leagues. I think they're seeking to have balance where the Southeastern Conference is playing the Big Ten and vice versa, so the wealth can be shared. And honestly, I'm going to be authentic with you. I think television has a lot to do with that. Okay, I think there's no question that kind of cooperation is not just about the conferences themselves, but also about their television partners. So I'll stop there. That's as far as I can go. Okay, but I do think that was more of it. I don't know that the priorities for getting X number of teams in right now is as big an issue now moving forward, because I think they're discussing not just going to 14, but now the possibility of going to 16, into the playoff. I don't think that you're going to see either commissioner come forward with, okay, we're going to make these moves and guarantee a certain number of spots as long as we have 12. Okay. Yeah. I think they might want to secure that when they go to 14 or when they go to 16. And to some extent, I get that. I'm not gonna just cry blasphemy, okay, when we don't know what the real plan is once we go to 14 or 16. I think it's a fait accompli that we will ultimately get to 16, although right now on the table it's only 14. with the two teams getting a bye. I think that can change. I do. And I
Okay.
think that might be a point of discussion that's taking place right now.
Tim Brando's here on the show. Now, one of the teams you mentioned earlier, Iowa State, you had them back-to-back weeks earlier in the season. You saw them trail Baylor and then come back, and I think they outscored Baylor something like 40-7 at the end of that game. And then you saw them go on the road and beat West Virginia. So this team is, 6-0, 7-0 for the first time since 1938. What does Matt Campbell? Yeah, what does Matt Campbell have going there? What's clicking right now for this team that is dealing with some injuries, especially on defense?
Yeah, and Pete, he has, from a stats standpoint, Rocco Beck is not, going to give you a Herculean quarterback rating. Okay, he's had some games last week, by example. He was missing some open receivers. He had an issue with his shoulder. He thought he identified it by changing his shoulder pads, and that happened before the Baylor game. And he was spot on that night. He was really good. His quarterback rating that particular night was unbelievable. But and against West Virginia, he was also very sharp in an emotional setting with his dad, Anthony, becoming a member of the West Virginia Hall of Fame that very night. I thought that last week, and because I worked the Friday game last week with Oregon and Purdue, I was able to get home to Chateau Brando and watch all the games on Saturday. Now, I was a little pooped. I was a little tired. I had to fly out of Indianapolis really early after a late night game had come to an end in West Lafayette. But I watched, in fact, I turned away from the Texas-Georgia game for much of the second half because I knew Georgia had that game tucked away. And my buddy Spencer Tillman was calling the Iowa State game. And UCF was just putting on an incredible show. And credit to Gus Malzahn for having his team with Harvey at running back and also the change to quarterback. The change he made at quarterback was huge. And running a lot of quarterback power, which he's done that in the past. He did it in Springdale, Arkansas as a high school coach. He did it, while he was at Auburn with a running quarterback that he actually got to the national championship game before Jameis Winston beat him in 2013. People forget that. That was a converted defensive back that he had playing quarterback. Gus is a great play caller, and schematically, he can cause problems. And he did in that game. And I thought Iowa State, for the first time, appeared mortal. I thought the first half of that game, they were, okay, we got this. And then all of a sudden they got punched in the mouth. And they got punched in the mouth again. And they had to, they were put in a very bad position. Their defense didn't get a stop at a time. Matt Campbell had about a 4th and 7 or a 4th and 8 with the ball with about 7.5 minutes left. And instead of going on 4th down, because he was on the side of the field of UCF, he didn't worry about it. He said, you know what, my defense, I know that they will get a stop. Well, they didn't get a stop until the second series because UCF got a first down. And now they have to use their timeouts. He's such a good coach. He knew that Rocco didn't need a timeout, but he needed as much time as possible. So he took a timeout with 2:08 after a play. Then he took his other timeout with about 2:04 to play before the 2-minute timeout, which automatically stopped the clock, meaning he knew his defense had to get a stop, on 3rd down, forced the punt, and UCF got off a great one. I want to say the ball was out at about the 8, something like that, maybe the 5, somewhere in there. They had to go about 95 yards in 1 minute and 18 seconds, and he had the confidence in Rocco Beck to make the plays, and that his players were smart enough to know to make the catch against the soft coverage, get out of bounds, get out of bounds, get out of bounds. And if you were going to go down the middle of the field, it had to be either complete or complete for a first down, or just don't make the catch. Okay. Be smart. And they got the first downs, and all of a sudden, boom, 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 they get down to the inside of the 10-yard line with about 45 to 50 seconds left. They moved down really quickly, and I think had to kick off with about 30 seconds left. I think that's what UCF had when the game was coming to a conclusion. They're just great massaging of the clock at the end by the coach, with an understanding that his team, even though the defense had struggled against UCF much of the game, that his defense would make the plays necessary. And that linebacking core led by Freeler and several others was magnificent, and they were able to pull it off. They were outplayed in that game. I wouldn't say that about – I thought Baylor outplayed them in the first half, but they woke up and had an incredible, second half. And as you mentioned, scored the 40 points. And, they were down 14-3 right out of the gates. And by the way, I said before that game that Baylor wasn't that far away. And I think Texas Tech found that out, last week. Dave Aranda's team is much better than its record. And like so many other teams, TCU is making a comeback now. They've suddenly found some defense. And Hoover and that offense only got 13 last week. It's so emblematic of this conference, though, how a team built like Iowa State consistently can go out and win. West Virginia put everything in that game against them. And Iowa State played fearless on the road. And then they came back and just had a subpar first half, but they were able to overcome it. Think about that. BYU and Iowa State both had to make just incredible drives at the end of a game with no timeouts left, and they both converted on the same weekend, on a Friday night and on a Saturday night.
And the final score for both of those games, 38-35. How about that?
Yeah, incredible.
Just crazy. Now, you mentioned
you keep up. That.
Hey, I've just got one league to cover. You got several. Tim, what about West Virginia? Neil Brown has lost 9 straight games to ranked opponents. It feels like this program beats who it's supposed to beat, and then it loses who it's supposed to lose to. And this is a proud program with a lot of history. Yeah. The fan base, as you well know, being there a couple of weeks ago, is not pleased. How should we analyze and look at Neil Brown, what he's done, and what the future might hold?
He needs something good to happen between now. He needs a quality of life moment in the games that he's got remaining. I like Neil. I think he's a good coach. I do. But he's got some issues on the defensive side, particularly with his down front. They have not been as physical as you need to be to consistently stop the run. He's got good linebackers, really good linebackers. And, Trotter is as good as it gets. He's going to be a pro, just like his dad. There are really good players on that side of the ball, but they've not been as physical up front, and so their defense against the run has been problematic, I think, in a lot of games. And as good as Garrett Green is, he's got to get help from his receivers. There were a lot of times when, he was trying to keep a play alive, and the receivers just weren't coming back to the ball the way they needed to. And then when he tries too hard, he turns the ball over. And that's what happened last week. That was a game that I really thought they might bounce back. I thought that they might bounce back after that loss to Iowa State, because I was really impressed with the way they played the second half of that game, even though Iowa State took control, and Rocco was a lot sharper that night than he was last week. But I think emotionally, they had that blackout. They were honoring the coal miners before the game. The vibe in the building that night was so positive that you kind of thought West Virginia was going to take that game over quickly. And a couple of calls went against them early. I thought, especially in the pass interference, OPI, PI situation. And I don't know that they could get over it. And you could tell by the way Neil was responding to it that it was pressurizing him in a way. He knows that he's got to turn this thing around. And that makes them a dangerous team the rest of the way. It just turns West Virginia into a spoiler in November, because now they're going to be looking for an opportunity to at least have a good finish to the season so that Neil can hold on to his job. I'd hate to see them make the move, but the potential of it being made is probably real.
Now, when you look at disappointments in this league, the teams that probably come to mind for most folks, Oklahoma State sitting there at a shocking 0-4 in the Big 12. You mentioned Utah earlier in the conversation, and even Arizona. A lot of folks thought with that talent coming back, new head coach, they could turn it around. They got blown out by Colorado. So who's most disappointing right now in the Big 12 of those three?
Oh, gosh, I'd have to say Arizona, even though he's in his first year taking over for Fish. He's got a hell of a quarterback, a first-round pick wide receiver, and it just hasn't happened for them. When I went in to do that, when Devin and I went in to do that game with Kansas State, we really thought we had two teams that would be vying, not just one, but two teams that would be vying for the Big 12 championship. The reason for that was all the players that had united to come back and play there even after Jed had left. Jed thought he was going to take most of those guys with him to UW, and it didn't happen. Can they bounce back? Again, there's time. There's time for Arizona, just as there is for West Virginia, to turn this baby around. We're just past the halfway mark, but November's to remember can sometimes be, epic. As much as we're talking about the celebration that's going on in Provo and in Ames, Iowa, that thing can turn around quickly. The margin for error is so slight. The team that plays the best within the margins, okay, it's a team that plays the best in all three phases. And that's one of the reasons why I really like Iowa State, is the team that's going to win. At Kansas State, more so than Iowa State, has shown a propensity to win games that would be outside the purview of their past. And I'll throw up the Colorado game as a great example. And by the way, Deion Sanders, what a makeover that team has had, since the first 3 weeks of the year. It's been the complete reverse of what we had last year, where they came out guns a-blazing, and then all of a sudden they started losing guys. They didn't have enough on the depth chart to survive the month of November. And now this team's flipped the script. I mean, one more win, they're bowl eligible, which I think you'd have to say, based on what we thought coming in, would have been tremendous growth, regardless of what happens the rest of the games. If they go to a bowl, 6 or more wins has got to be considered a success. Now they may be thinking 9. Maybe they may be thinking, we could get into the championship game if enough things happen and some of these teams lose. Kansas State is winning, though, in a game against Colorado with as many dynamic plays, in fact, more dynamic plays than the Buffaloes made on their turf. And the reason for that is Avery Johnson. Avery Johnson is, I think, the most transformative player that the Big 12 has seen come in this year as a leader. Now, Beck is having a solid season, running the program the way I think they all knew that he could. Within the confines of a lot of 12 personnel, 13 personnel, we're going to control the football and let our runners run. And they got 3 of them, okay? Avery Johnson's doing it with his own legs and his own arm in a lot of cases. And yet Kansas State can still block field goals, still block punts, still do the little things well. That has historically given them an edge from the days that Bill Snyder got that thing rolling. And now they've added the dynamic play into their arsenal, which has made them, I think, a team to keep an eye on. I think it's Iowa State and Kansas State on a collision course for Farmageddon right now. That's what I think. But that isn't to say that any of these other teams, including Deion's in Colorado, can't make a difference. We almost saw UCF and Oklahoma State, 2 teams that were spiraling in the wrong direction, almost pull off mammoth upsets last week. And if they had, they would have been legitimate, because for 3.5 quarters, they outplayed the teams that eventually would beat them.
No doubt about it. So when you look at your game this weekend, Tim, you've got Texas Tech at TCU, a Tech team that was 3-0 and then had a bad game against Baylor, and TCU was struggling going into a bye. They lose to Houston on a Friday night. They come back, they upset Utah on the road. So 2 teams coming off of very different games, very different vibes. What is your sense of this one going into Saturday?
Well, now we've got the athletic directors getting at it, right? We got Kirby Hocutt, challenging Donati, saying, hey, you got some tickets that are available. Why not make them available to us? I love reading that story. So that old Southwest Conference now morphing into Big 12 rivalry is heating up again, and Sonny coaching against the school that helped make him famous, and his dad was a legend. Barron has been kind of enigmatic at quarterback. There have been times when he looks like he's lights out, times when he just hasn't been sharp at all. I think the issue for them is their running game. Taj needs to be healthy. The only time I've had them this year was at Washington State early.
Okay. Yeah.
Taj didn't play in that game, and it meant everything to him. They need Taj to be available to tote the football. I mean, he is a big-time NFL running back. The other backs are okay, but not great. They're not special the way he is. And I think that his ability to be a difference maker in this game is what's going to give Texas Tech an edge. Now, Hoover is a work in progress at quarterback. It looks like with some of their receivers that they should still have some dynamic plays within them. But obviously they had trouble against that Utah defense that's so solid in their secondary. Both of these teams have shown an ability to give up big plays. So I think we're not going to see a 13-7 kind of game. If TCU wants to win this, they're going to have to be the kind of dynamic team that we saw 2 years ago, making some big plays in the passing game. And Hoover could do that. I think it's going to be a really interesting game, and one that the impact could really echo throughout the remainder of the year, particularly if Texas Tech wins. If you look at Texas Tech's schedule, and McGuire has really solid personnel on both sides of the ball and depth, even with the injuries, he can survive some of those, I think. And if he wins this game, I think Texas Tech is going to be the kind of problem we all thought they would be for the big boys in the latter stages of November. But I think it's going to it'll take 30, not 13 for TCU at least to win this game.
Well, last thing then, Tim, we sit here at the halfway mark. You mentioned the crash course for Farmageddon. BYU sitting there undefeated. Yeah. Iowa State's undefeated. I know we don't know all the tiebreaker situations yet, but if you're looking at the Big 12, what are we looking at come Arlington in early December for that championship?
Well, we haven't even mentioned the Holy War yet. How much fun is that? How much fun is that baby going to be, right?
Oh.
Particularly when Utah is not in a position to play for a championship, but to ruin it potentially for BYU.
I know.
My goodness, that could be incredible. And as I said, I think all points are to that Farmageddon game. I'm going to listen. I think that one of those two games is going to provide a definite team in the championship, and the other game, whether it's the Utah BYU or the K-State Iowa State game, I think one of those teams could be left out. Okay, so one team, I'm going to guarantee that one of those teams, either Iowa State or BYU, is in the championship game, okay? Mm-hmm. I'm going to say the other team is going to be in a position where they have to win or they're knocked out. And somebody could sneak in. That somebody could be Texas Tech. It could be. But they got to get a lot better defensively. They got to stop having those moments when there's a bust in their secondary and somebody is running wild and you don't even see a defender, on your screen when you're looking at the replay. Those things have got to come to an end. But chances are we could have as many as 3 games in that last weekend, Thanksgiving weekend, that could influence and impact, who makes it from the Big 12 into the championship. And that makes for a lot of fun. Right. My statement at the beginning of the year that this was the most competitive league in America, bottom to top, not just top to bottom to top. I think it rings true even now. Say what you want about the other leagues and their strength of schedule, and I know the metrics are always on the side of those teams, but this league is giving us more entertainment value than any other league in America.
It is going to be a fun next few weeks. He's Tim Brando. He's got the call this weekend, TCU and Texas Tech. Big Fox, 2:30 Central kickoff. Tim, I know you're busy. Thanks for fitting us in. We so appreciate the time.
Happy to do it, Pete. Anytime.
All right, that's Tim Brando. I'm Pete Mundo. Of course, we appreciate our radio affiliates as always on YouTube. Subscribe, hit the thumbs up, and same thing on the podcast. We'll talk to you soon at heartlandcollegesports.com.